The man who vanished from a prison that didn't exist. The astonishing true story of Richard McCoy, the Skyjacker who outsmarted the FBI. On a warm spring night in 1972, a silver Boeing 727 thundered through the skies above the American West, its cabin eerily silent except for the rustle of parachutes. Inside, a young man with calm eyes and a military jawline checked his altimeter, counted his cash, and jumped into darkness. Below him stretched the endless black desert of Utah. Above him, the legend of D.B. Cooper was about to be reborn. The story of Richard Floyd McCoy Jr. isn't fiction. It's one of those rare American tales that sounds like Hollywood fantasy. A Vietnam veteran, a family man, a devout Mormon, and yet a man who pulled off one of the most daring skyjackings in U.S. history, escaped from a maximum security prison using a homemade gun, and vanished into the desert. It's a story of brilliance, desperation, and mystery, and it begins in Provo, Utah, with a man who seemed to have everything. The perfect American. Born on December 7, 1942, the very day of the Pearl Harbor attack, Richard grew up under the long shadow of America's wartime heroes. From childhood, he dreamed not of wealth, but of adventure, of flight, of being remembered. Teachers called him bright, disciplined, and unusually serious for his age. By his teens, he was already flying small aircraft from a local airstrip. In 1964, he enlisted in the U.S. Army, later serving 2 tours in Vietnam as a helicopter pilot. Fellow soldiers said he had nerves of steel, the kind of man who could fly through gunfire without flinching. His comrades described him as quietly fearless. But when McCoy returned home, the country he'd served so loyally had changed. The Vietnam War was losing support, jobs were scarce, and veterans came home to protests instead of parades. McCoy, like many, struggled to adjust. He enrolled at Brigham Young University, studying law enforcement, hoping to become an FBI agent someday. He attended church regularly and lived a seemingly peaceful family life with his wife, Karen, and their 2 young children. Yet beneath that calm exterior, something restless burned. The legend of D.B. Cooper. In November 1971, the U.S. was electrified by a mystery that would soon inspire McCoy's own crime. On Thanksgiving Eve, November 24, 1971, a man calling himself Dan Cooper boarded Northwest Orient Flight 305 from Portland to Seattle. Mid-flight, he handed the flight attendant a note. It read, "Hi there, I have a bomb. This is a hijacking. I want $500,000 in cash and 4 parachutes when we land in San Francisco. No funny business." When Hancock hesitated, McCoy calmly showed her a green object inside his bag, a hand grenade. He smiled reassuringly. "Don't worry, ma'am. No one's going to get hurt if they do exactly what I say." The pilot, Captain Jerry Anderson, radioed air traffic control. The FBI scrambled into action, fearing another D.B. Cooper-style hijacking. When Flight 855 landed in San Francisco, McCoy's demands were met swiftly. $500,000 in small bills was loaded onto the plane, along with 4 parachutes. Passengers were released. 85 people walked off the plane unharmed. Only the flight crew remained. Then, McCoy issued his next command. Fly east toward Denver. As the Jet 727 lifted into the night, McCoy carefully checked his gear. He removed his tie, his shoes, and his disguise. He instructed the pilots to fly at 10,000 feet with the cabin unpressurized, identical to Cooper's plan. He ordered the lights turned off. Then, somewhere above the Utah desert, McCoy opened the rear stairs of the 727, strapped the money to his body, and leaped into the night. A gust of wind tore through the plane as he vanished into the darkness. It was 8:13 p.m., eerily close to the same time D.B. Cooper had jumped 5 months earlier. The chase. When the plane landed safely in Denver without his hijacker, FBI agents immediately connected the dots. Same type of aircraft, same tactics, same parachutes, same calm tone. Another Cooper-style hijacking had just occurred. This time, however, McCoy had made a crucial mistake. As he prepared to jump, he dropped a handwritten note on his seat, a detailed instruction sheet for the pilots, filled with phrases like maintain airspeed and descend to 10,000 feet. His fingerprints were all over it. Back in Utah the following morning, April 8, 1972, McCoy returned home like nothing had happened. He greeted his wife, played with his kids, and even went to church that Sunday. But neighbors would later recall that McCoy had suddenly started spending cash, hundreds of dollars in small bills, most of them marked by the FBI. When agents visited his house days later, McCoy didn't panic. He even agreed to talk. He said, "You think I'm that Skyjacker? I've been in Utah all week." But the FBI wasn't convinced. They searched his house and found a duffel bag stuffed with $599,970 in marked bills, a parachute, and a handwritten draft of his hijacking note. When he was arrested, his only words were, "You can't prove a thing." The trial. The evidence was overwhelming. Fingerprints matched, handwriting matched, the money matched. Even the pilot, Captain Anderson, identified McCoy's voice and mannerisms as those of the hijacker. During the trial in June 1972, McCoy sat calmly, sometimes smiling, sometimes taking notes as witnesses testified. His defense lawyer argued that the FBI's case was circumstantial, that someone could have planted the evidence. But the jury took just 2 hours to reach a verdict. Guilty. McCoy was sentenced to 45 years in federal prison and transferred to the newly opened federal penitentiary in Lewisburg, Pennsylvania, a place considered escape-proof. But McCoy was not a man who accepted confinement easily. The Great Escape. Inside prison, McCoy remained polite and quiet. He earned the trust of guards, worked in the metal shop, and even taught Bible study. But secretly, he was planning something extraordinary. Using scrap metal and dental plaster, he built a replica handgun, painted it black, and hid it in a Bible. He studied guard routines, lock mechanisms, and the prison's daily schedule. By August 1974, just 2 years after his arrest, McCoy and 3 other inmates made their move. As guards opened the metal shop door, McCoy brandished his fake gun and shouted, "Nobody move! This is a breakout!" The prisoners hijacked a garbage truck, smashed through the main gate, and vanished into the woods. For 3 days, the nation was on high alert. The FBI, state police, and National Guard launched a massive manhunt. Roadblocks appeared across Pennsylvania and West Virginia. Then came the report. 4 men had stolen a car near a farmhouse. When the FBI closed in, McCoy opened fire, with a real gun this time. A shootout erupted. Moments later, McCoy was hit twice and killed instantly. He was just 31 years old. The unanswered question. With McCoy's death, most thought the story ended. But one mystery remained, a question that haunts FBI files to this day. Was McCoy actually D.B. Cooper? The similarities were undeniable. Both men used a 727. Both demanded parachutes and cash. Both were calm, polite, and military trained. Both jumped into remote areas and vanished. Even McCoy's family believed it might be true. His wife Karen once told a reporter, "If Richard wasn't D.B. Cooper, then D.B. Cooper sure learned a lot from him." FBI agents publicly denied the connection, but privately, some were unsure. In one memo, an agent wrote, "McCoy fits the Cooper profile in every respect except age." To this day, some experts believe McCoy was indeed the mysterious D.B. Cooper, that his 1972 hijacking was not a copycat, but a second attempt after the first had partially failed. To be continued in Part 2. In the next part, we'll explore the astonishing FBI investigation, how McCoy's legend evolved after death, and the modern evidence that might finally answer America's greatest aviation mystery. Was McCoy really the man who jumped from the sky and vanished forever? The man who vanished from a prison that didn't exist. The astonishing true story of Richard McCoy, the Skyjacker who outsmarted the FBI. Silence in the desert. When the gunfire ended that afternoon in Virginia, the FBI agent stood among the wreckage of a stolen car, its windshield shattered, the engine still ticking with heat. Inside lay the lifeless body of Richard Floyd McCoy Jr., dressed in civilian clothes, a .45 caliber pistol in his hand. His short life, soldier, pilot, father, outlaw, had ended in a sudden, violent instant. News of his death hit Utah like an earthquake. Neighbors who once saw him mowing the lawn or playing with his kids watched the national headlines in disbelief. Skyjacker killed in shootout. Vietnam vet identified. His wife, Karen, refused to believe it. She told reporters, her voice breaking, "That wasn't the man I knew. He was a good husband, a good father. He wasn't a criminal." But even she couldn't explain how nearly $500,000 in marked ransom bills had been found in their home. To the world, McCoy was dead, but the mystery of who he really was and whether he had lived another life before his capture was only beginning. The FBI's hidden files. After the shootout, the Federal Bureau of Investigation quietly reopened parts of its D.B. Cooper case file, comparing fingerprints, ransom bills, and physical evidence from the 1971 hijacking with what they had on McCoy. The similarities were eerie. Both hijackers boarded Boeing 727s, the only commercial jets with rear staircases suitable for midair jumps, demanded cash and 4 parachutes, ordered the plane to fly low and slow with an unpressurized cabin, wore business suits and sunglasses, spoke calmly, never harmed anyone, and treated the crew politely. Even more uncanny was McCoy's description: tall, lean, in his early 30s, with a military haircut. D.B. Cooper's witnesses described the exact same thing. But the FBI faced a major problem. McCoy's fingerprints didn't match those found on the Cooper evidence. At least, not exactly. In 1971, fingerprint analysis was manual. Technicians matched prints by eye, not by computers. And in Cooper's case, the evidence was messy. Prints smudged on in-flight magazines, partial ridges from seat armrests, and cigarette butts that had long been discarded. There was never a definitive Cooper fingerprint to compare. So, while some agents insisted McCoy had to be Cooper, others argued there wasn't enough proof. One FBI memo from 1976 read, "We must conclude that McCoy cannot be definitively identified as Cooper, but the similarities are too extraordinary to dismiss." The wife who knew too much. After McCoy's death, his wife Karen became the subject of intense FBI scrutiny. Agents suspected she might have known about the hijacking or helped hide the money. She denied everything, saying Richard had told her the cash came from a classified military job. But years later, she began to speak differently. In a rare 1980 interview with the Salt Lake Tribune, Karen said, "I think Richard might have been D.B. Cooper. He always wanted to be remembered for something big. He loved flying more than anything." She told reporters how her husband had practiced parachute jumps long before his 1972 hijacking, even in the Utah desert, eerily similar to where D.B. Cooper was believed to have landed. She recalled how he studied weather patterns, flight routes, and wind speeds. Then came a chilling revelation. In McCoy's personal diary, written shortly before his arrest in 1972, one line stood out: "The sky remembers everything." Investigators began to wonder, could this have been a clue, a confession, or just the poetic rambling of a restless mind? The Cooper connection. By the 1990s, as new technology emerged, retired FBI agents began re-examining the old Cooper case. One of them was Russell Cullen, who had been part of the original McCoy investigation in 1972. When asked years later whether he believed McCoy was Cooper, his answer was immediate: "Absolutely, without a doubt in my mind." Cullen pointed out that McCoy's hijacking wasn't a copycat. It was too perfectly executed to have been based only on newspaper reports. The details McCoy knew, the rear staircase mechanism, the cabin pressure adjustments, even the way Cooper had demanded no funny business, weren't public at the time. Another retired agent, Bernie Rhodes, later co-authored a book titled D.B. Cooper, The Real McCoy. In it, Rhodes and Cullen presented what they called irrefutable evidence linking McCoy to Cooper, including testimony from McCoy's friends in the Utah National Guard who claimed he once bragged, "You know that Cooper guy, he was a fool. He only asked for 200 grand. If true, that remark came before McCoy's own hijacking and before any public details about Cooper's demands had been confirmed. But the FBI never officially endorsed the theory. Their official line remained, "McCoy is not considered a suspect in the D.B. Cooper case." Still, for many Americans, the connection was irresistible. A clean-cut hero turned outlaw, a man who literally jumped from the sky and disappeared. It was the kind of legend only America could produce. The parachute and the river. In 1980, almost a decade after Cooper's disappearance, a boy named Brian Ingram was playing along the Columbia River near Vancouver, Washington. There, buried in the sand, he found a decaying bundle of $20 bills, totaling $5,800. The serial numbers matched the D.B. Cooper ransom money. The discovery reignited the mystery. Had Cooper or McCoy drowned in the river after jumping? Or had he buried the money deliberately as a distraction? When experts analyzed the bills, they found traces of algae suggesting they'd been submerged for years. But there was still no body, no parachute, no definitive proof of what happened after that fateful jump. Decades later, in 2008, another team of amateur sleuths using high-tech metal detectors claimed to have found a parachute strap buried deep in the forest near Mount St. Helens, close to Cooper's suspected landing site. The FBI took samples but publicly dismissed the find, saying it didn't match the type used in the 1971 hijacking. Still, whispers persisted. The area was also close to where McCoy had once trained with his National Guard unit. Coincidence, or the final footprint of a man who refused to be found? A man of two lives. To understand Richard McCoy is to confront contradiction itself. He was, by every account, a devoted father, husband, and Mormon. He wrote to his children from prison about faith and forgiveness. He loved flying, served his country honorably, and never harmed anyone during his crimes. Yet he also lived a double life, a man willing to defy gravity and the law for a dream of freedom and fame. In one of his last letters, written weeks before his escape from Lewisburg prison, McCoy wrote, "They say the sky is a ceiling. They're wrong. It's a door." The modern search. Even after McCoy's death, the hunt for D.B. Cooper never truly stopped. Over the years, the FBI investigated more than 800 suspects, from ex-cons to war veterans to missing pilots. They examined fingerprints, DNA, and even titanium particles found on Cooper's necktie, suggesting he might have worked in aerospace manufacturing. In 2016, after 45 years, the FBI finally closed the D.B. Cooper case, officially declaring it unsolved. Their statement read, "After one of the longest and most exhaustive investigations in our history, we are no closer to identifying the Skyjacker known as D.B. Cooper." But many former agents refused to let it go. Bernie Rhodes still insists McCoy was the man. So do several pilots who flew both hijackings. One flight attendant from the McCoy incident once said privately, "He had a calmness about him, the same kind of calm people described in Cooper. It was like he'd done it before." The legend lives on. Today, over 50 years later, the story of Richard McCoy and D.B. Cooper continues to haunt the American imagination. Movies, documentaries, podcasts, and books revisit the case every few years, always with new theories, new suspects, new twists. But no one has ever proven beyond doubt who jumped from that plane in 1971. What remains is something larger than truth, a symbol of rebellion, courage, and mystery. In a country built on the idea of freedom, the man who literally leapt into the night became a folk hero. And if that man was Richard McCoy, then perhaps he got what he always wanted. Not wealth, but immortality. The final theory. In 2021, a retired aerospace engineer named Tom Kay published a detailed forensic study comparing McCoy's known background with Cooper's profile. His conclusion shocked even veteran FBI investigators. McCoy's military record matched the kind of aviation knowledge Cooper displayed. McCoy's language, his choice of phrases like "no funny business," was identical. Both used green duffel bags and fake grenades. Both vanished in regions they personally knew well. Kay's theory? D.B. Cooper didn't vanish. He came home to Utah. He proposed that Cooper had survived his 1971 jump, hidden the money, and resumed life quietly until financial stress or simple boredom drove him to repeat the crime in 1972 under his real name, Richard McCoy. It was, Kay wrote, the most daring encore in American criminal history. The sky remembers everything. If you visit Provo today, there's no statue or plaque marking McCoy's story. His grave is simple, his name carved into cold stone, his life summarized by dates. But in the minds of those who still chase mysteries, Richard McCoy lives on, part legend, part ghost. Every year, skydivers gather near Mount St. Helens for CooperCon, a festival honoring the legend. Some wear suits and sunglasses, jumping from planes into the dusk, reenacting the impossible. When they hit the ground, laughing, they raise a toast to the man who vanished. Some call him Cooper, others call him McCoy. But maybe they're both right. Maybe in the end there was never a D.B. Cooper or a Richard McCoy. Just one man chasing the sky until it swallowed him whole. Epilogue. The man who outsmarted gravity. No one will ever know for certain what drove Richard Floyd Jr. McCoy to trade his wings for a parachute and his medals for a mask. Maybe it was restlessness. Maybe it was the ache of a soldier who felt forgotten by the nation he served. Maybe he just wanted to feel the rush of freedom one last time. Whatever the reason, his story remains one of the most astonishing true tales in American history, a reminder that heroes and outlaws are sometimes the same person, seen from different skies. When asked years later what he thought of McCoy's legend, retired Agent Russell Kalam said quietly, "He fooled us all. Maybe that's what he wanted. Because in the end, McCoy didn't escape prison. He escaped history." And somewhere in the cold wind above the Rockies, perhaps the sky still remembers the sound of a man falling, not to die, but to disappear.